Shalom and welcome. Excuse me. Welcome to this edition of Revealing the Truth, where we cover the headlines, the heart lines, and biblical truth. I'm your host, the Reverend Rabbi Eric Walker, and it's a privilege for me to introduce you to Errol and Marjorie Gibbs, authors of Discovering Your Optimum Happiness Index, the OHI.
That's right.
Marjorie and Errol, welcome to the program.
Thank you for having us.
Welcome for having us, Reverend.
Well, we're delighted. You are avid readers, self-inspired researchers and writers. Religious, scientific, educational, philosophical, and humanitarian pursuits highlight their work. A multi-generational family life, nurturing child development, community business, and corporate experience underpin their quest to inspire happiness in others through their seminal work on the Optimal Happiness Index. Global travel afforded the Gibbs a panoramic view of the human landscape to observe how people in various parts of the world experience happiness and unhappiness, coexisting in a cultural mix of wealth and poverty. What a fascinating topic of determining what determines our happiness.
Mm-hmm.
Now,
would you describe yourselves as happy?
Yes, we do.
Absolutely.
We do.
All right. And what is your score on the Optimal Happiness Index?
Well, our score will run somewhere between 800 to 1,000. The actual scale goes from happy, very unhappy, sorry, to unhappy, happy, very happy, and optimum happiness.
Right.
We postulate that most individuals would probably be somewhere in the range of 600 to 1,000. The score really is not a specific single score. It's 600 to 700, 700 to 800, 800 to 1,000. And we created a band because some questions may not have the same legitimacy for everyone. Yeah.
What made you go down this path? You traveled, you saw people who were at the lowest rung of what we would consider to be wealth, on the wealth scale, on the affluence scale, all the way to the highest levels, and there was great disparity. As a matter of fact, in my psychology courses many years ago when I was in college, we used to plot this out, and we would find that on the scale that those that had the strong family nucleus,
That's right.
compared to the independent wealthy,
That's right.
the impoverished saw joy in all things. The wealthy had a more jaundiced eye, and in their scale they had this quotient of aloneness, of abandonment, of isolation, but they had great wealth.
Yes.
And the people at the bottom rung would say, if you say to them, well, what would you do if you won the lottery? They say, well, how will we do that? We can't afford to buy a ticket. A very realistic,
That's right.
very practical approach. And why would we want to when we have our family and we have our life together and we work together and we pray together and we sing together and we eat together and we join together with other families and we become a larger family, and all of a sudden this is what, and you come from the islands, and I think that this is something that is an attribute which we have lost in the continental Canada. Lost it. I think you have Western Canada probably has more of it than Eastern Canada. Toronto, Montreal, cosmopolitan, but Calgary and the Wild West, which you still have the Wild West.
Absolutely.
We've lost that island. My family comes out of the shtetls and the pogroms, and we were not miserable. We had what we had. If you watch Fiddler on the Roof, it's a picture of joy, even though there was oppression of the Cossacks. The life that we had, although we were set apart and we were somewhat watched over and controlled, we made the best of our situation in a smaller environment. When we got to be big and we started setting up these artificial standards of life, looking at Puerto Rico in this devastation of this storm, you interview people from the island and they say, we'll rebuild. I have my family, we're okay. Sure, oh yes, we lost everything. It could be years before we have this. You know, we remember when we didn't have power.
Right.
It was okay. We tell our children, they were the old stories, now they'll be your stories.
That's
and
right.
they have the attitude, well, we'll be fine. Our families have always been here. It's happened before. Where if that happened in New York City, oh my goodness.
Yeah, it would be quite a calamity.
It would be devastation.
Yeah, but we
There's
have
no way out. How do you develop this attitude? And I know that in your discovering your optimum happiness index, it has to do with first a foundation and a relationship of faith.
Absolutely.
And a spiritual connection.
Absolutely.
Because otherwise you're missing half of this. How did you discover this?
Well, first of all, let me respond briefly to what you just said, because there's something that is happening in the, let's say, the developing or the underdeveloping world that is drawing a similar parallel to the developed world. So the innocence that you spoke of and that we experienced when we were growing up, it is changing radically. The 20 years ago, 30 years, 40 years ago, I think we would be more perfectly inclined to say that when you're on the lower end of the economic spectrum, you probably a bit much more happier. What we are finding is that as we expose these worlds to the international scene and what is happening, the affluence, the materialism of the world, that is starting to diminish. The happiness is starting to become despair, because now there's a need, a desire for the same things. And we see it reflected in crimes and a lot of stress in communities and neighborhoods, because now we're able to start comparing the old with the new. So in our day, we generally would be about the same economic level in a village. But today, you could go through a village and you could see 10 very old houses on one very affluent, someone is coming in and building a very affluent structure, whatever. So what I'm saying is that you're seeing this disparity, and that is starting to create some nervousness for governments, local governments, and it's reflected in criminality and criminal behavior of all kinds. So that is the one thing that we are concerned about. Just go back to your other brief question you asked me again. But let me just share a bit about the book and how we got to this place. Part of it is exactly what we just shared, is looking at disparity, trying to understand what is embedded in the U.S. Constitution, where we talk about the inalienable rights of the individual, that's endowed by our Creator, life, liberty, and happiness. But when we examine the reality, the real world phenomena, something changes. We see something quite different. And we see much happiness in the world. As a result of that, Marjorie and I decided that we felt that we could make a contribution to maybe a new narrative on happiness, having seen both sides, being on both sides of the equation, coming from, the multi-generational families and having scarcity in some cases, like when my father died, and then coming to Canada and having a great life, raising children and having great corporate experiences and all that. And we felt that we had sufficient that we could present this in the form of a very significant narrative, not entirely or extensively scientific, although we did a lot of research to find out what the scientific minds are saying. And ultimately, we would like to move this project to a new platform. So we are trying to awaken a consciousness about the capacity of happiness to truly liberate human minds and to create better societies. So what we'd like to do is ultimately team up with some psychological associations, perhaps, or country that is on the forefront of happiness, and produce a more global perspective. Because we have looked at a lot of some of the research out there, and we find most of the models are top-down models. And we postulate that when you're looking at the question of happiness or national happiness, it should be a bottom-up model, because it's the aggregate of the individual and the family and the community happiness what relates to the national happiness. One of the, I wouldn't call it a flaw, but one of the things we observe is a lot of the research looks at what the country can afford the individual in terms of happiness, in terms of lifestyle, economic and otherwise. But you could be living in a very affluent country and still be a miserable sod, miserable person, So that is why we felt that if we approach the study from the bottom up, it will have a lot more relevance because it's the aggregate is what's critical to us.
Marjorie, as you began to embark on this study and begin to develop these things, you have a little bit different background than your husband. You grew up on a different island. You grew up in a different family structure, and you merged these family structures. When you two met and you found out that you were happy together, and that's where a lot of this begins, is finding out where you fit and happiness together. What were the essentials that you were looking for that you knew would bring you contentment with Errol, that you would find your complement? Because we tend to look at an individual is responsible for his own happiness, and a couple, it becomes this this marriage of two worlds. And are the two worlds together better than the one world apart?
Yes, definitely. Because what happened, we're responsible for each other's happiness. Number one, our communication skills. We like to talk. We talk till wee hours in the morning about anything and any issue. We read together. We do everything together.
Similar worldview.
Yes, we have similar worldviews. We talk about issues that people are afraid to tackle, and we discuss them openly and try to work out reasoning. We're co-equals, we're co-partners. Everything we do, we are always together sharing. We have common visions. We cook together. We travel together. We raise the kids together, not just one-sided, like in some countries that just the mothers that take care of the children. We both share equally everything we do.
So who was your role model that...
My parents were my role model.
So they were like this. They did things together. You
That's
saw
right.
this, and this matched up to what your vision was.
Yes.
So, Errol, did you have the same kind of influences, the same kind of background that afforded you a way to recognize in Marjorie that this was your complement?
Yeah, I would say yes. I would answer that in the affirmative. Our backgrounds actually are similar in many respects. The multi-generational household is pretty common anyway in the Caribbean. Our mothers, quite equal in the way, how should I put it? They're very dominant perspective in terms of the religious upbringing.
Yes.
So that is the foundation that we both shared. We came from large families, so we do understand the context of sharing. Like her family and my family, 11 kids, 14 kids. So we understand that. We understand the necessity and the obligation, not only to share, but to understand how do we treat the weaker members of the family. It's not just the ones who, because in a big family like ours, you would definitely find that some are more articulate, some are more ambitious, some are more educated. How do you manage the ones who are not? And really what you're looking at is a microcosm of the real world. So this is where you have to develop, the altruistic love and all of the understanding. Without that, you cannot go into the role and function, because now it becomes quantum, it becomes very complex. How do you deal with that if you couldn't deal internally? But one of the things we have done, and if we may, we have enlisted in our book on page 21,
Yes.
20 what we call attributes, behaviors, and activities that make Marjorie and I happy. And this will give you a sense of really the, how should I put it, the formula that we have been following. So should we read them out to the audience? We can do that very quickly. Or?
Absolutely.
Okay. So I'll have Marjorie read and these are 20. These are really foundational.
Right. Taking responsible for each other's happiness, knowing and trusting God's guidance, nurturing a friendly marriage, reading books together, loyalty in marriage, sharing dreams, reliable friends, we're co-partners, co-equals, co-owners, a peaceful home, peaceful living, common vision, sharing research, cooking together, optimistic future, intelligent conversation, practicing healthy eating, laughing out loud regularly, and a traveling companion for over 1 million kilometers.
Well, over 1 million kilometers we've traveled together.
Wow.
Yeah.
So when you came up with this list, you drew upon your own successes, looking at what was going on with you that were keys to your success as a couple.
Right.
Now, do you have to be individually happy, or is as a couple is your happiness defined by this particular list, because this is all, the two shall become one?
Right, exactly. Right. There is the premise, we live by a premise, exactly what you just stated there. So for us, individual happiness does not equate to marital happiness or the composite of what we will call a happy marriage or a happy friendship. If one is happy and the other one is unhappy, well, that equates to unhappiness because it can transcend.
That's right.
So it can, it can transcend to unhappiness. The idea is, let's go back to this. One of the things that we have found after speaking to many individuals, throughout this whole process, every time we ask the question about happiness, almost 100% of the time people have said to us, you're responsible for your own happiness. And we will always be dumbfounded and baffled by that statement, because it might sound good and it might sound noble, but the truth is we are interdependent beings. And our happiness does not come from sitting in a room in the darkness, walking in the desert and shouting, I'm happy, or getting up every morning and just reading quotes. It really comes from the interaction. It is the essence, it is the apex of human happiness, is the nature of the interaction that we have with others. And that is one thing that we would like to truly bring as a new narrative, because like I said, we have heard almost inclusively every single person that we have talked to just automatically came to that conclusion. And I don't know if they think it's a feeling to say that I rely on someone else or whatever, but we are all our brother's keepers, and there's no way we can construe or imagine that we could be happy without a good relationship, without working in a great corporation or having a great family or great friends.
So speaking to that, how do you foster a relationship or an environment where one does not use this unhappiness or expression of unhappiness to dominate, manipulate, or drive the narrative to get their own way, or to, how do you create this environment where you are committed to the vision of the sum of the parts is what makes the whole, and that the whole is what the target is, and not the individual? How do you, each one of us is created by God as an individual, then the two shall, for this reason a man will leave his mother and father and cleave to his wife, and they shall become one. We look at this one, I don't think that anybody really has a clear picture of what that one is supposed to look like, because there's so much conflict, and even in the body of Christ,
yes, that's right,
there's still the same statistics of divorce, the same statistics of spousal abuse, the same statistics of murder, the same statistics that the world experiences. So although as a minister of the gospel I would say that without the component of God you're just going to be like the rest of the world, but in fact we're seeing evidence that that's not the only aspect of this connecting to the source of creation. It has to be more than that, and Scripture tells us that our people perish for lack of knowledge, that without a vision the people perish.
That's right.
You can have a relationship with God, but if there's no vision for the marriage, there's no vision for the home, no vision for the family. And you painted an interesting portrait. You both looked at the portrait of your family and said, we want this, and we're going to replicate this in our life. Now, do you have to have that picture perfect, or can you take a look at this flawed family? I came from a mortally flawed family. All of us dispersed. I left at 15. My older sister left at 16. My younger sister stayed. So she was raised almost as an only child. We went off in our way in the world. I went off to college at 16. My sister was 3 years older than me, so she was already at college, and we never came back because there wasn't that cohesive. So I've been gone 50 years. And so, it wasn't that. So I began searching I knew what I didn't want, but I didn't have the clear picture. And so I do believe that home is an important aspect of laying a foundation for our children and our children's children to be able to replicate this model that you've created, and that will evoke a sense of secure knowledge of who you are and that you are loved, which I believe would be an incredible part of the quotient in the happiness index.
Absolutely. But there's I understand exactly where you the question that you're asking. What we look at, you mentioned religion, and I always say to folks, the reason why the Christianity or Christendom has been fragmented beyond belief, because they are what we call the essentials. And when we agree on the essentials, that becomes the glue notwithstanding. Now, it's the same thing in marriage, or the same if you were constructing a building. There are some things that are essential foundations of that building. Okay. For instance, in our happiness index, we have 10 key happiness indicators. That becomes the foundation. We wrote a book sometime 2011. It's called 5 Foundations of Human Development. And this document, 600 pages long, considerable research, and what is based on, we postulate that there are 5 foundations upon which we must grow and to actualize ourselves and truly benefit from the whole our religious dispensation, and that is spiritual, moral, social, intellectual, and physical development. So all our work is predicated on some foundational principles or beliefs. So in marriage, we have, from a biblical standpoint, there are 5 foundations. And if I may try to remember them, there's completion. If I might just go through the book, and I'll say
spiritual success, moral success.
No, not those ones. We are looking at the this is purely biblical, and it is, where is this?
Well, I'll tell you what, we're going to go to break because we have a break at the 25. We're talking with Errol and Marjorie Gibbs, discovering your Optimum Happiness Index, your OHI. We're going to take a short break, and when we come back, we're going to talk about those 5 components. We'll let you find them. We'll weigh right into it when we come back from our break. We'll be right back.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Shalom. I'm the Reverend Rabbi Eric Walker, Executive Director of Igniting a Nation and host of the daily TV program Revealing the Truth, seen live every Monday through Friday from 9 a.m. to 1 p.m. Central Standard Time at www.ianbn.com, and then replayed throughout the day and night via our website. All of our segments can be seen on the Igniting a Nation YouTube channel. Since our launch in January of this year, we've expanded our global reach to over 54 countries with a social media following of over 125,000. Our commitment is to bring you the most in-depth interviews with authors, subject matter experts, and thought leaders from around the world. We have interviewed guests from Israel, Brazil, England, India, and all across North America. All of our authors are featured on the Books and Media page on our website, www.ianbn.com. There you can find a direct link to the book you want to order, and we receive a small commission directly from Amazon. There is no cost to you for this service. In addition to our daily teachings and interviews, we make available to you the archive of all of the interviews on our YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram channels. Our live program is available from our homepage, and there is never a charge to you for any of this access. We made the decision long ago that we would remain a commercial-free resource that would not be influenced by any pressure from any outside company. There are only two ways that we are able to continue to operate this ministry and provide you with the only live 4-hour daily Christian television talk show program. The first is through your support and tax-deductible contributions to Igniting a Nation. These can be made directly through the donate button on the website or sent through the mail to Igniting a Nation, 2700 Corporate Drive, Suite 120, Birmingham, Alabama, 35242. The other way we support the program is by offering you a unique opportunity to have access to over 10 years worth of teachings on a subscription basis. The teaching archives contains all of my prior sermons, Torah studies, prophecy in the news videos, and much more for the low subscription price of $5 per month. This subscription grants you unlimited access to over 800 hours of content not available elsewhere and is updated weekly with the most current prophecy classes. In addition to 20 hours of original TV programming each weekday, we invite you to join us live every Monday, Tuesday, and Thursday evenings for our Prophecy in the News classes. The times and locations are listed on our events page on the website www.ianbn.com. Every day, you and I are faced with the challenge of where we will go to hear the truth. We are committed to bring you the only program of its kind that covers the headlines, the heartlines, and biblical truth. We cannot do this without your support. Since we launched on January 5th, 2017, we have aired over 300 individual teachings, interviews, and commentaries not available anywhere else. We are now working side by side with almost every major Christian publishing house to bring you the most in-depth feature interviews possible. Our 1-hour features address every subject that affects the believer's life. We are hearing of salvations from the Middle East, Africa, and all across the United States. Lives are being changed every day, and we have only just begun. Our mission is to become your trusted resource and grant you access to the people, tools, and information you need to grow in your relationship with the Lord. You can help us by liking us on social media and through your financial support. We know you have many choices in who you support, but we are prayerfully asking you to consider helping us keep revealing the truth, true to our calling, to cover the headlines, the heartlines, and biblical truth like no other program available. Donate today and help us bring the message to the four corners of the earth. Visit www.ianbn.com and donate, buy a book, or subscribe to our teaching archives. Without you, we do not exist. Shalom and welcome back to this edition of Revealing the Truth, where we cover the headlines, the heartlines, and biblical truth. I'm your host, the Reverend Rabbi Eric Walker, and we're visiting with Marjorie and Errol Gibbs, authors, co-authors of Discovering Your Optimum Happiness Index. Welcome back to the program.
Thank you very much.
When we went to break, we were talking about the 5 biblical principles for unity, stability, longevity, and happiness in marriage. And you were going to walk us through these 5 fundamental principles, which, when applied into your life, will bring you greater happiness.
Absolutely.
What are they?
We'll have Marge articulate them and then perhaps read principle 1 or 2, given, depends on.
Okay, it's companionship, completeness, enjoyment, procreation, protection. And we have the Bible verses or chapters and verses to back them up, and it's all in the book. And I'll just read the principle 1 on companionship. The principle of companionship affirms, I am alone without you. I am unable to achieve my fullest potential in life without you. With you in my life, I can experience the oneness of heart and head, working together to achieve our fullest potential, which is best expressed by the words us and ours, no longer me, my, or mine. Companionship does not merely imply being in one's presence. It begins with an understanding of the needs of each other. It means a spiritual, emotional, and physical connection to each other. Companionship means setting aside quality time to share conversations and listen to each other's needs, hopes, dreams, and aspirations. It means sharing some common indoor and outdoor interests. Most of all, it means nurturing an unbroken bond of friendship, which says, I will never abandon you for another.
You know, what's so interesting is this is exactly what God is saying to us in relationship to Him.
Yes.
Yeah.
That we have to be joined together, one with the Lord in these same ways, and it begins with that, and then you replicate it in marriage.
Yes.
As a perfect reflection of the throne of grace.
Exactly.
The God of restoration, the God of healing, the God who never leaves you. And so these are affirmations of exactly what God's message is, and so you're giving us the practical tools to emulate heaven on earth with the one God chose for us.
Right.
Well, Marjorie, take us to the next one, completeness, because I'm fascinated by this concept. And this is the first time I've really seen and heard it put in this context as a reflection of our relationship with God. So in the vertical, God's now allowing us in the horizontal to apply the principles of heaven in the horizontal, which becomes the cross piece on the cross that makes it complete.
Yeah, it's very interesting you use the word vertical and horizontal, because in our previous book, we dealt extensively with our vertical relationship with God and a horizontal relationship with man in 5 foundations of human development. What we try to do in our work is to bring the real world phenomena, create a link between what we call theology and technology. How do we bring the reality of what we have learned? So what we found over the years is, I would call it a missing link, a link between theology and technology. And that is why we find so much difficulties with the fact that we have such a growth in world religions and in knowledge and studies in religions, and yet we find that our world is really thirsting, dying for knowledge. And yet we have all the great institutions of knowledge and the great prophets and prophetess. And when we look at it fundamentally at the ground level, we could say nothing but we are baffled, to be honest. So we have embarked, given up my career, and Marjorie given up hers, and we have embarked on a mission to bring a new narrative. We believe that we need a new mission-critical direction for this planet. This is what we attempt to do with our work. But Marjorie will read another piece.
Completeness or protection?
Completeness. Yeah.
Okay. The second principle is completeness, and I'm reading from page 34. The principle of completeness affirms that each marriage couple is saying, I have checked and examined my life carefully and concluded that you are the best person to meet and fulfill my needs. Since my needs are not temporal, but permanent, I, therefore, need you in my life permanently. My life is incomplete without you. I will live a life of trustworthiness, loyalty, and fidelity, and will forsake all others until death do us part. The marriage vow is the most important proclamation of global happiness. No other statement, when put into action, can bring more happiness to marriage, family, and the world than the marriage vow. Powerful, profound, and far-reaching in its capacity for completeness.
You know, this idea of marriage, when I did marriage counseling, and in my training, we tried to encourage each one to develop their own identity so they would be fulfilled and they would bring more value to the marriage by their own individual fulfillment. But we might have even ventured into the area to say, you know, if you're depending upon another person for your completeness, for your happiness, for these kind of things, that there's making somebody responsible for your happiness is an unfair burden, and this kind of goes against the norm of traditional psychological marital counseling from even a biblical standpoint. But what you're saying makes so much sense because it's not a codependency.
Absolutely.
You're not promoting that there be this unnatural affection, this unnatural connection, that I have to look at my spouse's countenance, and if I'm not happy, I have to do what I have to do in order to jump through hoops in order to put the smile back on her face. That's not what you're saying.
No.
Absolutely not. You can look at the fact that we have diverse careers. We have the ability, other capacities that are totally apart from. But what we are getting to, the essence we are getting to, are those things that must be essential, those things that are essential, and that's what we're driving at. But we do have independent lives. Everyone has an independent life. But what we are looking at is essential. How do you create a concreteness in the essentials so that it becomes a fortress against things like, or statements like irreconcilable differences? I mean, why not reconcilable differences? Why not start marriage counseling with the idea of reconcilable differences and let that become one of the pillars? We rarely hear of reconcilable differences, but we always hear about irreconcilable differences. So these negative attributes, and just the mere negative thoughts, does take us in a very different direction.
So, if I hear you correctly, you don't have to strive for agreement.
Absolutely not.
You have to strive for understanding.
Yeah, more so.
You don't have to be necessarily, it says, can two walk together lest they be in agreement? But that agreement does not necessarily mean acquiescence, submission.
That's right.
Exactly. It means understanding respectfully and allowing us to continue down the path together.
Right.
That's right.
To us, it means a lot of things. It means removing ambiguity, let's say, out of the communications or out of the discussions or the arguments or the disagreements. You know, it means, again, going back to fundamental principles. You know, what are the facts of the matter, as opposed to what happens. There's a tendency to become very emotional, whether we are talking about a marriage or a relationship in a corporation. Somehow we always seem to fall back into the more emotional rather than the pragmatic. So our work is really trying to remove the noise and remove ambiguity out of argument or out of situation. Let me give you a quick example. This is kind of a segue. But in Toronto, there was about several months ago, there was a great debate about black focus schools. And some folks said we need black focus schools because blacks are not progressing well in the mainline schools. And some folks said, no, we do not need black focus schools because they're taking us back to the Jim Crow era, although we didn't typically have that in Canada. But you can see the mindsets. And someone asked me, well, which side am I on? And to begin with, I said, I don't take sides. It's very difficult for me to take sides. So what you have done is you have come into the table predisposed with an answer to the question. but you haven't asked the right question.
Need you to click back on your icon again so we can see you.
Something, yeah, go ahead. Okay.
Oh, I don't know what happened.
There you go.
Okay.
You're
So
back.
I said, oops, jump again.
No, you were back.
Okay.
I'm back, but for some reason it keeps dropping. Strange.
There you go.
Okay.
It's just the internet on your end. It's okay. It's Canada.
Oh,
Yeah.
all right,
Canada.
that-
It's socialized internet.
Socialized internet.
Yes, somebody must need it more than you,
More than
and
you.
waited
So-
longer than you to use the
Yeah.
internet. So this is what happens in a
Okay.
socialized
But it's
environment.
called equity, though. It's also called equity. So where were we?
We were talking about whether or not they're black schools or black folk
That's
schools
right.
and not black folk.
And the question they asked me, well, what side are you on? And I said, well, no, I don't take sides. Because, first of all, you haven't asked the right question, and you come into the table predisposed. And likewise, you have predisposed answers. So then they asked me, what is the question? I said, the question is, what type of education is essential for a black kid to survive in a modern economy? So in other words, if the question is the right question, it will take you to whichever is the appropriate path. And this is what we do in our work. So we remove all this ambiguity and all this noise. So unless you ask the right question, and we find that we are not asking the right questions, hence we are unable to solve some of the world's problems. And they are really not complex. They are very fundamental. Now I would say something to you and you might immediately disagree. And I have said I've written to many, many individuals in high government offices, and I said, violence is not the problem. And I always say this and watch the reaction to people. Then what is the problem? And I would say, violence is a symptom of a deeper underlying problem in the human spirit. So we cannot cure violence, because it's a symptom. We cannot cure a symptom. We have to get to the root problem, find the root cause. So in the way we look at things is what we're trying to bring to the global conversation. Is a new way, which might, for some, it would take some time to really get immersed into the new narrative. But it's proven and it's tested in our careers and in our lives, and we are willing to be very bold about the statements that we make and the way we look at things. Yeah.
Is there a universal, agreed upon definition of happiness?
Here's what I would say. The answer is no. Because happiness is a complex, multi-layered set of human conditions. So there is no one and there is no secret to happiness. If you go to our website, one of our blogs that will remain permanent on the website is the question, are there secrets to happiness? So rather than try to condemn people who believe there are secrets, we are just asking the question. And in our conclusion, we are saying, no, we have not discovered in our work and in the 17 years that we have been looking at this subject, that there are no secrets to happiness. It's a complex, multi-layered set of human conditions. And one of the reasons why we created our model around the 10 key happiness indicators, and it's self-directed, so we are allowing the individual to self-direct in terms of how he answers the questions, and we are looking for absolute answers, no ambiguity, so the answers are either in the affirmative, it's yes or no, 0 or 10 points. And we choose these 10 key happiness indicators undergirded by attributes, achievements, and customs. So that gives it another another bit of complexity. What we believe is that anyone who answers the questions, 100 questions, 10 key happiness indicators, 10 points per question. Anyone who answers those questions, we are almost totally convinced that it will be the first time they would have looked at their lives through the panorama of these 10 key happiness indicators, or any 10 key happiness indicators for that matter. And that is because we look at happiness mostly from a lifestyle perspective. And we are not clear in our minds that happiness is both, so put it this way, we have made it clear that happiness is both spiritual and the natural. All legitimate happiness, but the higher value proposition is joy, which is in the spiritual realm. So happiness for most is in the material realm.
We still there?
We're here.
Yeah. Okay, happiness is in the material realm for most individuals. That is why when people lose the material things, the material possessions, whether it's the job, the car, the houses, the businesses, you find that people may go into anxiety and depression and even suicide. The model that we are creating is to take the individual from where he or she is to a higher level and to be able to sustain it, because happiness in the traditional context is not sustainable. So what we are saying is, if we can introduce the higher component, which is joy. Joy is the sentinel that guards the soul when happiness takes flight. So the idea is to introduce joy as the higher imperative of happiness. And sometimes we say mere happiness.
Okay. So I take this assessment and excuse me, it will identify some areas where I can improve.
Absolutely.
It shows me 10 areas, 10 questions each, 100 questions total, 10 points per question, top score 1,000.
Right.
I then see where I plot on this continuum.
Right, exactly.
Then do I also get in your book, I know the answer, I'm asking for the audience,
Okay.
do I also get tools in order to adjust, modify, improve, and then do I retest at a certain point of time to see how I'm progressing upon this index?
Yeah, but one thing I will defer to, and that is the fact that ultimately our ultimate goal is to take this work that we have and introduce it into fields of psychology, criminal justice, religion, wherever there are stressful jobs like in business, whether it's lawyers, doctors. We would ultimately like to team up with, like I said, psychological associations or countries and create, such as Bhutan in the Himalayas and the United Arab Emirates.
Yes.
One of the things we suggested in our book is that every nation should have should install a Ministry of Happiness and a Minister of Happiness. So we postulate that happiness has the greatest potential to create better societies, because if you look at the benefits of happiness, we find that happiness has a higher value. It's a higher value proposition than even our political systems of government that we have today. So we would like to see the Western world move towards, we believe it's the next frontier of leadership will be underpinned by happiness, because we have tried many political systems and all kinds of theories and principles of management. And here we are today in the 21st century, and we are still struggling with communication, even at the lowest level in human evolution. We are still struggling with communication within families, within communities, nations, on the international front. And the question Marjorie and I continue to ask is, how is this possible in light of exponential growth in world religions, science and technology, human knowledge, financial and material, great financial material wealth? How is this possible? And I think we are missing on some very fundamental principles. I think one of the bigger things we are missing on is the failure to recognize individuals of high intellect that may not be of the institutional mindset. We are not bringing these individuals to the table. We don't fundamentally understand the difference between education and intelligence. We have not comprehended yet the oneness of humanity. So there are many things that we haven't talked about on the global forums that to me is so fundamental to a better world. And yet we expend billions of dollars believing that we can bring about peace through militarization. And the truth is, it doesn't cost us anything, because if we start with the peacemaker. And the problem is, now let me share something with you. We are writing an article right now we call the Triad Colossi. And the triad colossi, three-dimensional. It is God, man, and machine. It is spiritual intelligence, human intelligence, and artificial intelligence. So it's SI, IQ, and AI. If these three levels of intelligences are not in concordance and not complementary, we will never, it will not even be possible to build a better society that we all crave. It just will not be possible.
I understand. Errol, let me ask you this question. As I looked at the test, it requires a certain amount of self-reflection.
Yes.
Have you considered offering this for Marjorie to answer the questions about you? For example, you asked the question, are you humble in your dealings with others? Well, I might think I'm humble, but what if I ask Marjorie, does she think you're humble in your dealings with others?
No,
and a way to assess this, we have this rose-colored glasses view of ourselves.
Yes.
Oh yes, I'm sociable. Of course I'm kind to everyone. I have a wonderful life. Of course I'm as educated as I would like to be. And then your wife says, no, you've been talking about how you wanted to get that advanced degree. You should have stayed in school. You're not so happy with that. To be able to validate some of this, I think it would be an extraordinary tool in the assessment of how you perceive yourself, so that you two can even draw closer together, because I would have a hard time. I think in the area of humility, as a minister, I would say I desire to be humble, but the moment I think that I'm humble, I'm proud.
That's right.
Because I'm proud of being humble. Well, then you're not humble. So it's kind of one of those things of how I see myself, how I'm perceived. And this is I found it to be a very good set of questions that could be used on both sides of the aisle. Here's what I think of myself. Here's what my spouse, how she perceives that I operate in this view of myself.
You are an amazing fellow. I can't think of anyone who has really been able to address what we're doing in such a manner. This is amazing, because now you're talking about a cross, how should you put it? A cross assessment sort of.
Yes.
So we can do it in corporations and with bosses and employees, employees, because you're right. We do have an assessment of ourselves that can be flawed. You have now added another dimension that is now version what? Version 2.
There you go. So you'll have to add a new line there under advisement of Rabbi Eric Walker.
No, it is amazing. It is amazing.
You have been a joy to be on the program. Thank you so much. Unfortunately, we're out of time.
Absolutely.
And we've hit our time together, but we're talking to Errol and Marjorie Gibbs, discovering your optimum happiness index. You don't have to have a partner. You don't have to have a husband. You don't have to have a wife. This is for you and you alone to assess where you are in your life and ways for you to move closer to what it is that you set as a mark for yourself. We all desire to be perfectly happy. We don't really know how to measure that. This is a tool for you to be able to measure that and where you are and what you can do to improve. It all begins with your relationship with God. How does God define you? And how do you perceive yourself lining up with that vision that God has for you? He says He'll give you the desires of your heart, but those are the desires that He places into your heart. And how are you lined up with that? And are you truly working in the field, operating in the gifts, flowing in the place that God would have you, being a happy, productive member of society in your own home, whether you're single, whether you're married, whether you're contemplating marriage? These are things you must know about yourself in order to be able to evaluate what will make you happy in your today and in your tomorrow. Errol and Marjorie, thank you so much for sharing this great work with us. Discovering your optimum happiness index, go to ignitingnation.com. Click on Books and Media, scroll down to today's date, September 26th, and order a copy for yourself. Find out if you're happy, and if you're happy, let your face in on the secret.
Absolutely.
And smile at other people. God bless you, Marjorie. God bless you, Errol.
God bless you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Shalom, shalom. We're going to take a short break, and when we come back, we'll bring you the next edition of Revealing the Truth.